They'll try turning off your camera and see if it sounds better. I mean, I know you want to put your camera back on, but sometimes that's the problem.
I was having the same concern that Crystal was. Especially at the beginning, it seems to be getting better, but it might just be like where you were speaking, the microphone wasn't picking it up as well.
Yeah, I think the struggle when there's a lot of voices, it struggles to pick it up correctly. So.
Is there a Wi-Fi network?
Yes.
Wi-Fi net.
So it is 7:02, Crystal.
Okay. All right. Well, I will go ahead and call the meeting to order. Do we have any public invited to be heard this evening?
No, there's nobody here but us.
We didn't get lucky this time like last time. Okay. I'll move on to agenda item number 3, to approve the minutes from March 13th. Before we approve the minutes, do I have anybody that has any changes to the minutes or anything that they were concerned about or wanted to add? I see a nod. No? Nobody?
That was an inadvertent nod.
Okay. I was like, yeah, no, okay. So if we don't have any changes to the minutes, do I have a motion to approve the minutes from March 13th? Anybody?
I wasn't here.
I wasn't.
Oh, Alejandro.
Alejandro motions. Do I have a second? Okay. Kim seconds. All in favor?
The only those that were here can vote for this one.
All righty. So it looks like the minutes were approved from March 13th. We'll move on to agenda item number 4, and that is to review the Human Services Needs Assessment draft. Aliberto, I'm going to let you take it away.
Yeah, we were recording. Yeah. All right, so I have been thinking a lot about how to go through this. And for those that are on the computer, I'm going to ask that you follow on your own copies, because what I ended up doing is I ended up taking from the document, and Rob, we have one, the physical one for you, a packet right there. If you want to grab that packet, can you grab that packet right there? We printed it out for you, so you have it. There you go. Yeah. There is an extra one, yeah. You can give one to Cassie. All right. There you go. All right. So the way that I ended up doing it for our conversation tonight, and we can have other conversation or other points if you all have stuff that you highlighted as you went through the packet, is I basically, what they did this year that I thought was interesting is at the beginning of every section, they listed the top 5 human services needs for each of the populations that they used. Now, they didn't capture every population. I thought it was interesting that they didn't capture immigrants, but they basically captured, oh, yes, sorry, good point. I want to remind everybody that this is a draft document. What that means is we can share it with you, but it's not really meant for public consumption at this point. So please do not share it, because it's and you see that there's notes in it still. They're still working through it, but out of courtesy for us, because we asked for it, they let us have this draft for this meeting. So I don't think it'll change a whole lot between here and the final, but just to be just to respect the fact that it's a draft. Okay, just want to make sure that I shared that quick reminder that it is in draft form. It is not ready to be, for public consumption yet. So what I did, for those that are not here, I put the top 5 for each of the populations, except for substance abuse and mental health, because I thought that kind of was pretty straightforward. I put the top 5 needs in the, thank you, yeah, I did have some wonderful graphs and models in these white forms. And what I wanted to work on tonight was there are some you know, there's some trends among them, and I wanted to kind of go through those trends and talk about how, and what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna move this one here. So I then, I don't think you guys will be able to see it, but I'm still gonna put it up here. But I don't want to put it where it erases anything.
No, good idea. That's it.
Right there. All right. So then I kind of took everything from there and put it up against our current priorities. And I guess the conversation I want to have tonight is, you know, our current priorities are pretty broad. And I think much of it fits in there. Do we want to narrow our priorities from this side to this side, or do we want to keep them broad and put and connect where these go? And then the other thing is, you know, where I want to discuss where we're funding some of these things already and where we have traditionally not funded some things and why we've not funded some things that came out of these priorities. So that's kind of the conversation I want to have tonight and get your feedback on to see how we want to move forward. We also want to talk about our conversation with council, our conversation with Harold, and just continue to move forward on this complicated process. Any questions before we start on that?
What is that on the left column again?
These are the ones that come from this,
From the human services.
from the Human Services Needs Assessment.
Those are the top 5 in each of the categories?
Right, yeah,
Okay.
yeah,
And then matched against our current priority.
yeah.
So I guess I like more specific better than the broad.
So what that does, so I want to think about,
Yeah.
that's a great, so I want to think about logistically what that does. If you want to be more prescriptive, which I'm not saying is a bad thing, it will then there, if an agency that we have typically funded isn't doing what we specifically want, but they're in the same category, we cannot fund them if we narrow these down, which is not a bad thing. I just want to make sure that you're aware of that.
So, so I guess the safety and justice, like the
There's nothing about safety and
right
justice.
there, the last year, maybe not.
So yes, those are and I mean, we can decide or we're gonna have to go back to council, but we can recommend to council that we stop funding safety and justice, but then that would mean the Rocky Mountain Legal Center, Boulder County Legal Aid, Immigrant Legal Center.
You know, they're really important.
Yeah.
So Heriberto, do you think that it might, perhaps a place to start is also prior to maybe jumping into this, is to kind of connect the dots from where we left you all last board meeting, where we said we're going to present to council, and then talk about how that went and the feedback that we got from council. So then that could maybe inform how you want to proceed. What do you think about that? Does that feel like a way to connect the dots?
Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm probably gonna go down, guys, because I can't see anything and I'm like having a hard time like just kind of seeing where we're at. So I think if you guys want to just start conversating about that conversation with council, and then I'll make it down.
And listen to the recording and then ask any follow-up questions once you're here. Okay.
Yep.
That
Okay.
That works. So talk about what we presented, Heriberto, and then I took some pretty detailed notes about individual council members' feedback. So if you want to start there and kind of lay the groundwork for what we presented, and then we can talk about the feedback that we got.
Yeah, so again, a lot of it's not I mean, I also sent you my memo, and in that memo, it was a big portion of that was the council com that I sent to our council members. Now, it's not things that you have not seen before about the idea of what we're seeing as we see an increase in need and our resources just not keeping up. It was laying that context for council, and then once I laid that context of we can continue going that route. But like you've heard me before tell this group, we're going to continue to dilute the funding. I said, I presented that to council and I said, here's some models that we heard from when we talked to our nonprofits. Like as I've told this board, we've done at least four nonprofit engagement sessions with nonprofits, and board was always invited. I think Cassie came to at least one of them.
Yeah, Robert and Crystal, right?
Yeah. Came to at least one of them. So I gave them some ideas. One idea was that for years, this board has selected priority and percentages of the funding they want to go to those priorities. However, those priorities have never served as absolutes. They were just kind of guidelines, and we've never spent the amount of funding we wanted on those priorities. So I told them what we could do, one idea that we could do is we could look at actual historical spending priority and then make those absolute limits. In other words, if we're going to set aside 20% for food and 20% of 1.5 million is 3 million or 300,000, then we're not spending, no matter who applies or when applies, we're not spending more than 300,000. That has not happened in the past. If we have more applicants, this is why education tended to get the most amount of money.
She might have connected.
Yeah, so that was one option, is that we make that. The other option is one that our nonprofits have talked to us about, dedicating. So one of the things that they wanted is more stability. And so they were willing to sacrifice to get 3 years of funding, because the only way that works is if we choose one priority and say, okay, these 3 years, this year, we are going to ask the nonprofits in that priority to ask for 3 years of funding, which if they get it, we will fund them in that year, but they can't apply again. They're going to have to, they themselves budget the 3 years themselves. So they want to use most of it up front and just keep however they want to do it. But they're not going to be eligible for another until year 4, right? And then the other model that I gave them is like, look, council, you have your own priorities. You could just tell us what priorities you want to fund, right? Every year council creates its work plan. So we said you can tell us of your priorities. What do you want the board to look at? Well, the guidance they gave us, and Christina can talk more to this, was for sure they did not like models. They didn't want to do their priorities. They were more interested in doing the priorities that we're working on with now. And so the other thing they said, and Christina can get into this in a second, is they were really concerned about that second model because of the impact on the priorities that aren't for your funding will be really short.
No charger, that's the computer.
So yeah. So if you want to take over now.
Sure. So, admittedly, council said this was the hardest thing that they had definitely had to review and give feedback on. It was a very, very robust discussion, and they acknowledged that it's very difficult to make policy decisions around this, and they want to make sure to be really prudent about how they're doing that. They pointed out that nonprofits are not having as many donations as before. There's increased overhead, and along with more agencies applying. They wanted to make sure that what is our board's opinion. We had Councilmember Hopkins supporting the combination approach between 1 and 2, and really looking at kind of an augmented option number 2, the funding 3-year funding cycles. Councilmember Chris talked about service stacking and resource stacking, and what that meant in kind of what she explained is how are agencies leveraging what they're doing amongst themselves. And so, how we use the example of technology. Most of our nonprofits all of our nonprofits are paying for internet access. They're paying for IT. What is the opportunity to kind of pull together those resources and do some service stacking that will ultimately affect their bottom line and give them more to put toward programming? Let's see, that was Hidalgo Faring talked about donation decrease. The mayor really wanted us to continue to look at work plan and reports that we're getting. So her concern was that if we're funding an agency for 3 years, we don't want to fund a program long term in 3 years that aren't meeting the targeted outcomes that we have. And so she wanted to ensure that our contracts really do reflect that, if we need to, we can change course with that. She also was in favor of leveraging resources. Councilmember Yarbrough, who had been part of this group prior to being part of this board, prior to being elected on council, really believes that so much happens in 3 years for nonprofits. The world can change in 3 years, and doesn't know how that rotation would affect those agencies that didn't get funded in the first and second round. She likes the applications when they happen yearly, but would also support kind of a combination of that first model and second model. Councilmember McCoy talked about, he's really kind of the one that pushed the question, just in terms of, we're not ready to give policy direction now. Let's look at the feedback that council gives you all tonight, and then take it back to your advisory board and do this sort of process. It gives us the opportunity to align with the Human Services Needs Assessment, and bring it back to us with a couple more options. In our meeting with our follow-up meeting with Harold, he really talked about kind of looking at the picture more broadly and getting direction from council in terms of, you have this whole 3% right now. It's separated into 2 different pots. Really start there with council. Okay. And what is your direction around that? Is there a way to do that combination approach where we would fund an organization, organizations 2 to 3 years at a time? And then is there a process that we could also do competitive funding? And so given those parameters, there's lots of models that we could come up with, right, mathematically. But I think that where this board can really help is to kind of know the feedback that council gave us, and then be able to align some of the priority areas with what we're hearing in the Human Services Needs Assessment. Does that resonate? Is there anything that was unclear?
So I guess on the 3-year funding, we give them, not we, but they get all the money up front. So it's not like they have to meet, like at the end of year 1, there's not a benchmark they had to meet to get it.
There would be benchmarks,
Okay.
right?
Well, we have
There
to
were
create-
plans, we'd have to create them, but there would be targeted outcomes.
Alejandro has a question.
Alejandro?
Well, I'm gonna just be blunt. I disagree with that 3-year plan. I definitely do not want to see that happen.
Okay.
Alejandro, say more about
Yeah.
that. Yeah, help us understand.
Well, I agree with Councilwoman Yarborough. I think I said her name right. Chiquita.
Yeah. Yeah.
I voted for her, so she's amazing. I love her. Anyways, but the fact that nonprofits, they can change so radically within that first year. or a second year, whatever, within that year, I mean, there's a lot of changes going on with nonprofits that we've had for years right now in Longmont. That's happening right now. Political climate, budget cuts, or just change of who their customers or clients or participants are.
Thank you.
Thank you, Martha.
Martha, as well.
I also struggle a little bit with the 3-year part, but mine I think is more based on the needs are continually assessed, right? Like that's an annual item. I feel like these decisions should be made with current information. And I could potentially get on board with like an every other year kind of thing. Like if you got it last time, let's give room for some other people maybe for next year. But 3 years just, it sounds like a long time, but it also sounds like the people who don't get it will be hurting for an exorbitant amount of time. I guess I just want to clarify about if the needs assessment is going to be annual, like I just want it to match whatever it is that we're doing.
So no, the human services needs is not annual. It's part of the CBDG work that happens every 5 years. So it's going to be every 5 years that we're going to update the human services needs assessment, unless you want to pay more money to get them.
Yeah, we wouldn't have the budget to continue to pay that. I think to kind of speak to your point, Martha and Alejandro, there is a proposal that we can make or can draw up in a model that really looks like that combination approach. So is there a 2-year funding cycle that we could do, but then also a competitive to your points, be more nimble with meeting the needs of the community. And I think that's where we might want to talk through this human services needs assessment, the preliminary information that we have. So that was kind of what I understood council wanted us to explore, because that was a little bit of the best of both worlds, the best of what we were proposing. So Alejandro.
Yeah, so another, I don't know, and this is just emotion talking, a little bit of emotion talking. It feels also like if we were to do the multiple years, it's kind of like passing the responsibility of making those hard choices year by year.
So say more about that. What do you mean passing the response or passing the ability to
Oh, it's kind of like, okay, so we fund you for a year or a couple of years, so we don't have to worry about you now for a year or 3 years. I mean, fund you for a couple of years or 3 years, but now we don't have to worry about you, what's going on. I mean, of course, we're going to keep those organizations accountable for how they're spending their monies and whatnot. But it just feels to me like it's a kind of like a little shortcut to making those hard decisions every year that we do at the end of the year. You know what I mean?
And us bringing forward that model definitely wasn't trying to, shortcut anything. It really was an idea that came from the agencies themselves, because they really expressed the interest in, hey, we don't know at any given time what the general fund, because we get 3% of what we get. And so if we have a good year, we get more money, more of the allocation from that 3%. If the economy tanks, doesn't do as well as the previous year, that amount is smaller. And so that request really came from what would be helpful for us is to be able to project, like we know we can project, our financial people can project for the next 2 years, for the next 3 years, what we would need, and that would allow us to be able to budget accordingly. And so it was more about that than really going through the process of granting grants every year. It was something that came from that.
Yeah, Mr. Hendo.
I just wanted to clarify based off of that statement about kind of passing the responsibility on, every other year, however a cycle would be. Is it, when I going through, it was my understanding that we would be still doing it every year, but the grant allocations would extend beyond that. So it's not like we're not going to go through this process on an annual basis, but we won't be doing it for the same entities back to back.
Right. Yeah, we would just take that 1.4 million, say it's 1.4 million, and we would have 2 focus areas, 3 focus areas apply for that 1.4 million. And then the next year it would be a different cohort of the current priorities. And so we'd still be going through the process every year, but any particular agency wouldn't have to go through the process, but year 1 and then year 4.
Yeah, I think the concern that Councilman Yarbrough had was that's fine, but for example, if we were to choose health and well-being and education first, then housing stability, food nutrition, self-sufficiency, and safety would be left out of that 3-year model, right? And so that was her concern. It was that we would leave so much out. And there's agencies that really need this funding.
Right. Yeah.
And so that's why she preferred something more akin to every other year, type of thing. So reduce, so that would open it up.
I have a question. With the 3-year model, are agencies, the amount of money, would that increase at all?
Yes, well, when you say increase, what do you mean? I want to make sure I get your.
So but it is 3 years, right? So it would increase to cover the 3 years, but the amount that they get per year, would that increase?
They could build in their budget, say an agency says, what we're applying for is 40,000 this year, 60,000 the second year, and 80,000 the third year. Like they would build that into their proposal, is what I understood from nonprofits that brought this forward, because they can project what the potential increase in service provision could be.
Okay. But to be fair, and if you, so the question then would become, so right now, the way the funding works, not a binary, you ask for $100,000 and this board says yes or no.
Yeah.
The way it works right now is this board, the way, we'll get to that comment in a second. This board scores the applications, and based on the scoring and the range that we've created, determines how much funding they get. So let's say they did what you said, so 60,000 or 40, 60, 80, right? That's 180,000. But if we keep the scoring the way it is, let's say that they only get 70% of that 180,000 because they didn't score as high or whatever. So that means they'd have to budget, they'd have to figure out how they would allocate what they got throughout those 3 years.
Yeah. Okay. And I would say, I mean, I like it. I do. And I think that the downfall is there are organizations that would wouldn't get any funding for that. Was it first 2 years or 3 years?
First 2 years. And that's what you're getting.
But I think that I think it's one of the options on the table. I'm hearing it's not the most favorite, but we could prioritize the most high need kind of priorities, like food and nutrition, right? Based off of like what we're reading off of the.
Right, that's what we're hearing, and that's kind of what Heriberto has laid out.
What we want to prioritize the first year. I also think I like the hybrid one. It's every 2 years. And I had a question on that one. If we do the hybrid every 2 year with the 1 year funding, like small amount of funding to sustain organizations, does that minimize the funding for the rotation? And eventually does that rotation catch up to where we're just doing every 2 years and we're not having to do the one-off? Does that make sense?
So I'm trying to visualize it.
I don't think so, because we're not encumbering funds. Part of where we need to follow is that we can't encumber funds for the next year. So what we have for 2025, we don't have that number yet, but say that number is 1.4 million. We have that 1.4 million, and so we can contract with agencies in the future, but we can't do anything to encumber funds for 2026 because we don't know what 3% of that general fund is. Does that answer kind of what you're?
Kind of, because in the hybrid option, I think it was the last one. It was like the every 2 year, but then organizations would still get a small amount of funding.
There is
Every
the
year.
option, what they're talking about, what one of the ideas that has come about since is there a hybrid option where we could take a percentage of the funding and do that every 2 year funding, but then have a pot of money where maybe other focus areas could.
And will that reduce the amount of funding?
It would, because we would only have a certain amount.
So it would depend on which, and so but I want to get to Martha's point, because I think she makes a good point. And she said that we need to prevent people, like, if we're doing these kinds of things, we just need to keep in the back of our head that we would need to prevent agencies from tweaking their programs to say, oh, now we're going to go after this priority area, or so.
Yeah.
So we
They
just have
could only maybe apply for it.
Yeah.
And so my last comment is, I would like us to maybe pick 2 top ones, and then
wait, so 2 top what?
models, like, right, potentially, and then could we go back to our because they're the nonprofits, like, they're the ones that know their organizations in and out, what that funding hit could look like, what that would mean for them and each other, and get some feedback from them.
Get feedback. I think that it would, that's a really good idea. I think that the other missing piece of information is really this exercise that Heriberto has.
Okay.
You may see some trends in food access, for example, mental health, substance use. And so maybe that will guide this group into saying, this is the area that we might want to consider year 1 and 2.
I just have one more. Well, so say some nonprofits are sort of group 2, right? This because it's group 1, the first group 2. If the economy tanks, then group 2 will end up getting less, right? Because they.
Yeah.
And
I think group 1 will get it too. Everybody gets less. The economy tax every.
In 2025.
Like if 2025 is better than 2026, if the general fund set aside this year is, we're really talking about 2026 contract. But if
Economy tax.
26, it could affect 2027.
Yeah.
Yeah, it'd be 2027 the first.
Yeah, it would be the second. Yep.
I mean, maybe it will be the other way.
Maybe they'll get more. We can all help, right?
I think it may be worthwhile to try and figure out what the biggest needs are and what would make the biggest difference. So
Absolutely.
what's the biggest impact? So every year, given what the biggest needs are, which projects are going to make the biggest difference? And
So that's really hard to answer, because do you mean in self-sufficiency? Do you mean in education? Do you, what do you mean?
I think that's what we have to decide, is that, things are fluid. We just talked about all these external factors that could affect things. We have a 5-year needs assessment, and I'm not that familiar with them, I'm familiar with it now, but I think it could benefit us to understand what are the greatest needs right now. There's 25 options here, or there's 5 options, 6 options. Depending on how you categorize it, there's so many needs, and the needs next year may be different than the needs.
But we're not doing any assessment next year.
Right. But there's other sources of data. So we have 1 needs assessment that lasts 5 years, but you guys are working with the community every day.
Yeah,
And so I-
Alberto can speak to kind of some of what
Well, you can do projections too, based off of what the needs were, and then we saw the increases, right? So if that's moving up, we can anticipate those areas that have had huge jumps. Those are kind of the priority areas that we can focus on, because those were the biggest gaps.
I think that might become more clear as kind of Alberto takes you through this exercise, and then you think back to what the applications, what you read in the applications for this last year. I think that those two data points will intersect at some point.
Say is I've heard a few times about, this interest of, and I appreciate it, of sort of being fair and making sure that all nonprofits receive some funding. I think last year, the majority of all the nonprofits received some.
Yeah, we didn't,
We ended up, having to dilute some of the applications, so everybody got a little bit of something.
Right.
And I think that's extremely dangerous. I don't think that should be a factor that we weigh. These nonprofits are going to adapt. If our community tells them, I'm just making this up, but transportation and accessing mental health care are two of the 10 the greatest needs.
Mm-hmm.
I think our nonprofit community will adapt and submit applications to meet those highest needs. They're paving, it's funny, they need it. So let's give them some direction so they can adjust and they can serve the community in the best way. That makes more sense to me than spreading the wealth.
And we really led with that when we started to present this to council. Do you want to fund a mile wide and an inch deep, or an inch wide and a mile deep?
Yeah.
And so you're speaking more to the mile deep kind of.
Yeah.
Alejandro has a question.
oh, you're on mute.
There we go.
Little sucker. I clicked the hand raise, not the mute. Just more of a statement. I just want to remind everybody that all it takes is two major things to go wrong in life, and you can be unhoused. You can suffer from homelessness. So to be careful, just I don't know, like trying to isolate the needs in this room, because what is needed for me might be hugely different than what is needed for you.
Good point.
Yeah, and that's why we're gonna really make sure we focus on the needs assessment, right? And all the other types of this, like the assessments completed in the community.
Right,
So it's not our own bias, like I'm run assistance all day long. You know what I mean? But that might not be reflected in the needs assessment and the different Boulder County assessments that have been put out, so.
It almost sounds like you're speaking to Alejandro Maslow's hierarchy of needs. What is that bottom? What are the bottom pieces of the triangle? And all it takes is for a couple of those to fall out from under you, and it's chaos. So
Yeah, definitely the foundation. Yes, those cornerstones.
Yep. Why don't we move to walking through your exercise and then see how all of this will hopefully come together.
So what I want to do was to give you all a chance to, and for those that are on the screen, you can just type in the chat. So these, because you all can't see them very well.
But we can, between Amy and I, we can
Take pictures and upload them?
Yeah.
In the chat?
that's a really good idea. I was gonna say we could type it into the chat.
Yeah.
So what we're going to do tonight is just give you an opportunity to walk through with these all and put, there's each of you, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 of these. Each of you gets 9 dots. Actually, let's do 12. Let's give you 12 dots.
Doesn't matter which order. It doesn't matter, no. And what Amy's gonna do for our individuals online is take a picture of the sticky note of the white papers. And then you all would have 12 virtual dots, and you could let us know where you want to place your dots.
And then we'll do some dot
And
voting.
then we'll do some dot voting.
Yeah, and see what we think.
I might have to help too.
Yeah.
Or you can tell us what's in the dot.
You can have a proxy type. And so we're gonna send, for those of you that are on the thing, so can you get your hand up?
I'm assuming the dots are like funding preferences or ideas we like. Is that what the,
Purposes.
Some of the human services need assessment, right?
So how would we put our dots? Is it just on one paper? Because they're all repeated.
Yeah, well, some are repeating, some are not. But you put them on each, wherever you feel,
So one per or
you get two per.
two per? Okay.
That's why I give you 12.
Okay. I was like, wait.
And then we'll tally at the end and see what.
Put it all on the first
And
one.
you can't steal other people's dots.
DV survivors.
Yes.
Okay.
Do you need some help, Crystal?
Bill?
Yeah, if you guys wanna
Tell me, yeah.
Okay.
Where do you want?
Do you want me-
For the first, I'll do rent and mortgage and healthy affordable food. Rent and mortgage and healthy affordable food. That's here too. Let's see. Older adults. See, medical's hard though.
Homeless and previously housed.
Accessing healthy, affordable food, accessing mental health care.
For this population, homeless and precariously housed.
Can you talk to, I looked at precariously, but I was like,
So those.
So at risk.
You're right, those that are severely rent burdened, over 50% of their income is going to rent.
paying rent and mortgage.
Number 3.
Yeah. And accessing mental health care.
Okay.
This one is low income.
Low income families.
Ooh, wait, let me see, rent, food, utilities, house support, transport, I wish I had 3 dots for transportation, because I think my top 3 are medical, rent, mortgage, and food. So I would say rent, mortgage, and food.
Yeah, I mean, clearly those are like
Those seem to be
pervasive.
pervasive
And-
throughout.
Yeah.
Throughout.
Medical, and you can like either rank order both those and just pull the numbers and see that like those are.
Because, you know, a lot of
Concerned.
these
Just based on-
populations might have access to Medicaid or Medicare. This other one is DV survivor.
Domestic violence survivors, yes.
So that's emergency shelter. Hold on, not yet. Could you read it for me?
Oh, yeah, emergency healthcare services, safe house, emergency shelter, transitional housing, counseling and mental health support, faster access to mental health care, and permanent affordable housing.
Oh.
That's a tough one.
Emergency. So
Thank you.
safe health
You
emergency.
should be able to see some of the uploads or all of them now.
I would say safe house emergency shelter. Because we saw that, yeah, that there's Boulder and Longmont are the only ones.
Okay.
What's the one underneath that
Faster
one?
access to mental health care
Counseling,
and permanent affordable housing.
permanent affordable housing.
That's one.
Or,
But also think about what we fund, right? So permanent affordable housing is not necessarily something that
yeah,
human services, I mean, that would be HCI, that's what their job is. So consider our role as well in this.
so I would say, the,
Health. Counseling and mental health.
yeah, I think that kind of falls in the same as emergency mental health.
Okay.
And then, can you read the last one for me?
Program activities, so this is at-risk youth, program activities for positive youth development, access to mental health care, quality childcare, and accessing healthy, affordable food. What's most, where do you want to use your dots for at-risk youth? That's a hard one.
Yeah, I think,
They're all hard.
can you read it one more time?
When you say at risk youth, though, what age are you talking about? I'm thinking.
Anybody under 18?
One thing,
Anybody under 18?
parents have left and decide to stay in town to graduate,
Anybody under 18, that's a broad,
care,
that's a broad range. So anybody under 18, you know, that, 0 to 3, 0 to 5, quality, childcare can make all the difference for how kids get a good start. So anybody under 18.
I'll have to do quality childcare, because we're having a crisis right now for childcare. And positive youth development programs.
Okay.
Right, that's mine, guys.
Yours, you have to, everybody witness your vote, so everybody can walk in and vote for.
Go crazy, guys.
And then Amy will, as she's getting votes, either emailed to her or chatted,
She'll keep track of it.
we'll start putting those dots on for our people online, it's for Martha, Kim, and Alejandro.
Yes, Katie, you have a
I
question?
guess I just have a question about, it's very easy for me to just like be numerical about this, but I see two problems with that. One is that there are some really specific, in particular those two on the far right, they really have more unique needs. And so like their needs are unique in that could, in a scenario where I guess what I'm trying to figure out is how, like, this to me is very easy to choose, like, what's an A year, right? Because these things are so pervasively needed. But are we talking about are these A year priorities or are they overall priorities?
They're overall.
Overall, because I think what we would then have to do is look at which agencies are funded.
Well, and we also have to look at what have we, so for example, paying rent or mortgage assistance, we do that through the homesteading program. We've not typically done it through human services funding. What we typically fund the agency's program staff so they can do
Right.
the helping people get the rent or mortgage.
So when would that, I think that was my kind of other question related to how you kind of organize this, which is it's unclear to me, right? Like that, if we were to say that's a high priority, it would be understood that even if that's not something we do directly, we would focus funds towards
Agencies that do that.
Yes.
Yeah.
And we do already. So we fund the in between. We might ask them to, depending on how this goes.
Yeah.
We may say, we want you to increase your ask, right? So that we can help cover your staff that does that.
Yeah, and I question about that. So, could we allocate a portion of it for financial assistance in the community only and not just to cover their staff?
We never had before. I mean, you could. I mean, we'd have to. I'm not sure this is a council conversation because I'm not sure how that rule got set that we didn't do direct financial assistance.
No, sure, yeah, I don't know the history behind that.
Yeah. So we
Could
could
you look into that? Because I think that's important, because we could fund their case managers all day long, but if the money's not getting pumped into the community and
I think the one thing that the 1.4 million is not a lot. Unless you want to take all 1.4 million and put it into direct financial assistance and not fund anything else. That's the other thing to think about. Like 1.4 is not a lot of money when it comes to direct financial assistance.
Crystal used the term crisis.
Right.
Yeah, I'm just struggling again. These are all needs.
Yeah.
They are.
I don't,
Right.
so I need some help in
So
understanding.
tell me what you.
Yeah, do any of these needs rise to the level of a crisis?
They all rise to the level.
So
In your mind, they're really equally, the level of need is equal across all of them.
Yeah. So like, imagine you don't have a car and you can't ride a bike, but you still need to get to the hospital or a doctor.
You don't have that to access healthy food.
Yeah.
Yeah. Or just about a whole bunch of stuff without the transportation. Just to pick one of the ones that I think is like lowest in quote unquote crisis, transportation issues, right?
Right.
It's such a huge hurdle for people without transportation to get around. I mean, we built a hospital without a bus stop.
The thing I think about too is, I think about what's available. So if I'm looking at some of these low income communities, they might qualify for Medicaid or Medicare. Transportation, Longmont Ride just came out, and that's a $2 transportation ride. We have buses. Youth have free access to those buses. And there's other, like, so city council's really been vamping up that transportation piece. So I'm also thinking about like what resources are available for those things right now that I could sacrifice them
To
and
make a tough decision.
to make a tough decision. And so I'm also thinking like mental health supports. I think the county has been doing a lot for like mental health supports and getting people access to mental health supports, whether it's the undocumented community, children, mental health through school and things like that. So I'm also thinking it in that lens as well. So not that
Yeah.
one's more important than the other, but where are we seeing less resources for these things?
And when you read the human services, it talks about what's perceived as we have it, but it's hard to access.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
It's in there.
Access barriers.
Yeah, it's in the human services needs
But
assessment.
the other thing is like, I don't think I recall the exact data gathering window. And so like a big issue for me is the world has changed like in 40 days. And
Mental health.
so I'm just struggling with like, okay, what happened?
I
like,
got you, Kim.
what did this just like we're all, I mean, most people are like freaking out because the world changed overnight. So like, how did that world change affect some of these areas more significantly than others? Or is it just a level playing field and everything is a poop show?
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? Like, I'm worried about that. Like, you could predict, okay, yeah, back when this was done, like, yes, we all know that people are struggling because all of the emergency COVID funding like wound down, right? So, but now what else based on what's happened in the last 45 days?
Well, but what I will say to that is there's no way that we can cover with this, it's only 1.4 million.
No, I know that. I'm just saying, like, are some of these areas, priorities, more deeply affected by what's happened in politics than other areas, right?
I mean, that's the one I'm thinking. What do
DV survivors, Kim, do you want emergency mental health or mental health support?
Well, the thing too is like the pain
Access to mental health service. Thank you.
for that. But also, I mean, I think the hospitals do have programs that people can apply for to help with.
So Martha and
Okay.
So to that point, we know that food shortage is going to be a huge thing.
Yeah.
That's going to be huge.
So, and we are hearing that from our other advisory boards, our senior services advisory board, our youth advisory board, children, youth and families. We are hearing that, and they actually will be the Senior Services Advisory Board will be presenting that in their update to council.
The impact of like.
The impact of food insecurity.
To me, doesn't make sense is that we should get more money in a down economy, but it's the opposite.
Yeah.
Well, because we're tied to a percentage of the
I
general.
know, it doesn't make, even the general fund should say in a down, people are gonna be suffering. So we've got to give more, but I mean, I guess that never.
Well, then you have to, so then you have to, what are you gonna cut?
I know.
What are you gonna
Well,
cut?
So then, I mean, this is gonna, like, I would probably cut, like, I love the arts in a really. Right?
You would cut the museum.
No, I give like the maintenance. People are hungry, right? You close some galleries in the museum.
Right, so those are the kind of questions that council has to look at, right? But we'll talk a little bit with.
I just, yeah, but if you.
And now.
But it
income is 2, 4.
Yeah, I mean, but that's because we didn't talk to Harold about it. He's like, then you would have to have a conversation with council about, let's say this board would ask for 4%. So that means stuff for operations, right? That's gonna impact. That's where you get difficult making those.
Here, we get. But I guess.
I know
Yeah.
it's a source of income, right? But for nonprofits, I know I think I heard something about substituting, so maybe like helping them with relieving pressure with other bills like internet and light. I mean, we have our own internet and we have our own light, our own power. So, I mean, is there a way we can maybe donate some of that to the nonprofits to alleviate some of that pressure?
Well, I think we have talked to Valerie Dodd about IT, and they already have a nonprofit rate. We could talk to her again about what else we can do during this hard time, but they have created a nonprofit rate for the Next Light Internet.
Yeah, I saw that. Yeah.
It's more like, can we make it free? Right, you know?
I know, but it's.
Is everybody voted?
No, Alejandro needs to, he had 3 on one page, so Amy just chatted, Amy just chatted.
Okay, just fix, okay.
Amy, Erica, and Amy.
Is Costco good? Do we know what Costco gives?
It's no idea. I'm assuming they do, but I do not know.
Because I'm thinking they could give.
Oh, my bad. I thought we had 12 to pick.
Yeah, 12 to pick, but 2 per sheet.
Oh, 3, 4, yes.
2 per sheet.
It's okay, math. Hello.
It's late. I'm trying to follow on the computer. That's all. No, we're going out. I'm not even. I'm okay. I took ibuprofen and Vicodin before I came in. Yeah. I broke my foot and I tore 3 ligaments in my knee. My ACL, partial MCL, and my meniscus, I think.
That will be 4 for 1 for DV shelter.
For DV shelter, 4 and what?
Number 4, yeah.
Yeah, number 4 and what? You have 2 votes.
And then the adult, right? Older adults would be,
Yeah. I'm bummed out.
5.
You have 2 votes per page. So on older adults, what are your 2 votes?
Do you want us to read them?
I got, older adults, I got 2 votes already. So what, I need 1 more, right?
That's 2.
2 total.
Yeah, I haven't put any on the older adults for you.
Oh, that's 2 and 4.
Okay.
2 and 4. And
DV is 2 and
DV.
3.
Okay.
2 and 3, and at-risk, precariously housed is what?
Oh, that one's missing. That's what's happening.
This is your specialty.
Okay, give me a second.
I mean, at the end of the day, it's kind of a contest in terms of what the top 3 are.
Yeah, I think the big question again is, what's funny is I've been doing this now for 7 years, and none of this is new to me. And at the end of the day, human needs are human needs. Right? And none of this is new to me. It's just this is the way it is. It's housing stability, food and nutrition, health and well-being, and that falls in there. So given that, I mean, the bigger question is, do you want to do? So those are so part of the reason. So I'll give you an example. Part of the reason that we're having this challenge is that over the years, how we interpret this and how we do this is pretty broad. Mm-hmm. And so, for example, let's talk about health and well-being, right? In the past,
1 and 3, homeless.
1 and 3.
We would fund things like the LHAAB, they stopped applying. We didn't give enough money. I mean, they never got a ton of money from us, but we would fund stuff. But now, for example, in the last few years, we started funding stuff like Medicine Horse, right? Mm-hmm. Which is a smaller nonprofit that serves less people. But they do good work.
It's wonderful what they do.
Yeah, and so we started funding things like that. Now this year, you all scored Autism Society for Boulder County that provides support for kids with autism, right? And so what's been happening is that we have spread our funding nets more and more every year. So in 2020, this board only funded 29 agencies. In 2025, you funded 58 agencies, something like that.
Too many.
So you all as a board, as you've seen applications come in, you have funded more and more of them by scoring them higher and higher. Right?
But taking away from those historical, strong nonprofits that have been doing great work in our community.
Because you like their program.
I.e. El Comité had to like cut us off of the board and come back to the city council to ask for more money, and they got it. So like our work really got negated.
So yeah, that happened in 2019, right? Even though this year they got more money than they had in the past, right? Because they've also increased their request. They got close to 50,000 this year when they used to get 20,000 because they asked for more money. So as the years have gone by, this has, because we've kind of been more open to taking more nonprofits, and we funded them. At another point, that means other folks necessarily had to lose funding because we had to reduce the percentage that we were given to cover all the folks that you scored high enough to be funded. Right?
Yeah, and that was the conversation that we had kind of at the beginning of last year's funding cycle when, you all started to read your applications is what did you, actually before we roll them out, do we want to consider government agencies? Do we want to consider new organizations? Like those are some decisions to make, to think about that we can also include in this recommendation.
So getting back to your point. Yeah. This on the other side, let's say we say mental health, right? This is it. So that means if let me think of a health, St. Benedict's Health Ministry, right? We fund them, but they don't provide mental health. They provide wound care for unhoused and low income folks at the Arts Center. They do a lot of preventative stuff. They provide medication, etc. If we were to narrow and say we're only going to fund mental health, then we would fund things like mental health partners, medicine force, Rise Against Suicide, those agencies to restart the new art therapy that we funded this year, right? So this is broad, and that's what we've been working at. This is more narrow, and it would necessarily mean that we're cutting some people out.
I'm okay with that. I mean, the needs assessment doesn't say wound care is a top priority. We didn't make this list, and then we went through this list and we identified mental health as a high priority.
And these are the hard choices you'll have to make, right? And join this board to make.
I mean, but if people don't get health care, they're gonna need mental health the next year. Right?
So again, these are the hard choices.
Well, I mean, one of the things that strikes me is that, I'll use this education as an example because that's my area. In education, people are probably familiar with Title I funding, which goes to at-risk populations. And in, any given school district, you can fund that a lot of different ways. You can just go per capita. Any child who qualifies, it's going to the school times the number of children that qualify. But the problem is there's decent research on the amount you have to spend per child to move the needle. And so, as an example, St. Vrain only funds their highest population schools. You could argue with that, but there's a research basis for it. So, and part of it is that the truth is, if you go a mile wide and an inch deep, you're getting nowhere with anything. So you've got to figure out what can you make an impact on. And, yes, they're all urgent needs, and moving the needle on nothing does no good, So, yeah, it's a hard decision. It just seems like the needs assessment, the populations told us what are the needs.
So so Martha has her hand up too, so I want to make sure we get our voices. No worries. Martha?
Oh, you're muted. Oh, there we go.
There we go.
I think I struggle hardest with giving amounts to like established government entities because they're more business oriented. Like I find a lot of value in those smaller things who aren't typically funded and who aren't these bigger kind of ambiguous parts. So like, I mean, I won't identify the company itself. However, there's a very popular mental health agency that has been referenced today. But I could never work there because they pay their therapists so little. Like I'm very curious as to where their money is going because it sure is not going to the therapists. And that is why they have so few therapists. Nobody's going to pay or nobody's going to want to work where you're going to get, 25% of what you could get as a therapist. So that's just a little bit of my personal struggle. Like I would rather give to those smaller agencies because, so many of the bigger ones and well-established ones act like they're like, this is their money and they're entitled to it rather than, actually having a competitive edge or giving us information that says we're successful because in their process.
Great.
Yeah, I
Thank
second
you.
that. That is something also that I remember the first year when we did the new formula, or the first year that I ever scored. And there was a big organization in town, and they complained about the amount they were getting, but they really took the whole process kind of, I felt like a joke. So expecting that we're going to just get the same as always.
Yeah, I think that's part of what, we have really tried to lay the groundwork for and paint the picture for our nonprofit through these meetings that we've had that, this is coming. Like we are getting to the point where we are stretched to the seams. And so there has to be changes that changes have to be implemented. So I think we've been pretty clear about that, right?
Yeah, we told folks it's a competitive process. And again, I'll reiterate, this is why your scores are so important, right?
Yeah.
The way you score determines unless we want to change that model, which we can, but the way you score is how people get funded.
So I think the scoring questions
So then I need
positive to score to where it's kind of like a blend.
So we did a task force last year to look at the questions.
But I know it's not as easy because it's tied with Boulder County and City of Boulder.
If it's coming to the point that we need to just do on our own, it just means more work for the nonprofits.
Okay.
If you guys want, if this board says, we don't find that application useful, and so we want to change it, then we have to make the decision that we are going to go on our own.
Yeah.
And change up the application to what you want. And what that means is more work for the nonprofit to fill out an application for us.
It's a hard time to
And
put that on people.
Right, and we also have the opportunity to Councilmember Chris' point to look at how we've never gotten a joint application from an organization. Like how are they, resource stacking? How are they
Not
leveraging? How are they not duplicating?
So, yeah,
How are they?
I already warned our partners at saying, hey, this is what council wants to see. So we may be adding a portion and you may be evaluating a collaborative question.
Right, maybe there's.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what council.
Yeah, I think there were some questions that came from this board in our hearing. Does this organization collaborate here? do you, I know that several of you around the table asked that question. So, and I think you're keying into that, and that's something that we can build into the process.
Yes. But I have to say, both of them had really good answers on how we both working together. When I asked them, it's good.
It wasn't sharing of resources.
But yeah,
It
that
wasn't
was-
sharing of
yeah.
resources,
Yeah.
positions, money.
And so maybe a question I have related not to the content of like these categories, but more to the structure of the grant is that I do tend to think that the every other year model is a more safe landing place than every 3 years. And that has some appeal also because of the ability to be able to go deeper each year and not so wide. But the other thing that I think about, like, okay, let's just say it was a $1.4 million fund, is that it seems to me that it would be important to carve out also some portion of the AB year. So like, I'll make this up, but like that 200,000 or 400,000 or something is in that like category that you called it emergency or something, crisis or emergency something. But I'm emerging. And I'm kind of thinking about it in two ways. One is to address things like that priority, like some amount will go to collaborative grants, in these categories. And then separately, I also do see that some of these have very consistent kind of pervasive needs, but some are more narrow, but they're in that arena, they're urgent. So I also would want to make sure that the protection for domestic violence, survivors and at risk which are a little more, I would say they're more volatile categories, whereas these are more like pervasively difficult in all of these areas. This is a little more like, that feels like I wouldn't want to not fund any of that, because they're unique, they're more urgent. So it's like, whereas this is more of a flat line, that need always exists. These are more like the need goes really high, in some cases emergently, and then back down. But so you might not have as many instances, but you have acute need. I would hope to think about having some of that emergent category.
So we have funded the DV shelter for many years. This is the first year we didn't fund it because they didn't apply. But we have consistently funded
The shelter.
Safe shelter. Consistently. They just didn't apply because they had some issues at their administrative level, at their executive level. They didn't have their development director didn't meet the deadline.
Yeah.
They thought there was a different deadline, and we traditionally have been, we send it out.
Yeah.
We don't make exceptions.
People
And I'm
apply.
wondering too, instead of changing the whole questions, right, like maybe that's our scoring criteria, but when we do the interviews, we have a set of questions like, how many Longmont residents do you serve? And then there was something else that was brought up earlier, where it's those kind of honed in,
And those,
what's the impact in the community?
that's their applications, how many Longmont folks they serve.
And those are going to be the things that are like really determining, how are you collaborating with other organizations? And so maybe those subset of questions will help us then, maybe tilt that from a 2 to a 4 or a 2 to a 1, right?
So years ago, before any of you were on the board, again, the other thing you understand is these boards change, you're at some point, you're gonna go off and somebody's just gonna come on and they're gonna have their own priorities. And so many years ago, we used to actually, the board we would give, I don't know how to call it, basically extra points.
Yeah.
If they serve certain populations. Right, so you have a regular scoring, and then,
Right.
so if you were serving single moms, we'd give you an extra point, or if you were serving immigrants. We used to do that, and then we stopped because that particular board said, no, we wanted to make it more. Yeah, and so we stopped giving extra points, right, for specific populations.
Well, just to like the single mom, like we just read in the report, like 30 something or 30% of the population
Low income families,
was single moms.
Yeah,
children.
yeah.
That's crazy.
And you all saw my homesteading report, the vast majority, or not the vast majority, but a large portion are single moms.
And one income.
Yeah, and so she gets sick.
In Boulder County.
Yeah.
And she gets sick.
To Alejandro's point.
Yeah, she's in trouble.
Yeah, and
It's just a
she
way
gets sick,
from
she don't have money to pay her rent,
Yeah,
right?
that was me. I was that single parent for
Yeah.
raising my kids. So I used the hour center. So like knowing that the hour center is not gonna have food as much, I felt that. Like personally felt that. Like I know what that is going
And
to
that's
be.
one thing to hear from us.
Yeah, and so it's just, it's really focusing on those, like, we can't control the economy. We can't control what's happening with the housing market. Like, no one has the answer to those, but like, Longmont's making strides to try to provide affordable housing, but it's not nearly fast enough to meet the
Not
need right
tomorrow.
now. So how do we keep people afloat and above water? And when I look at some of these things, that's what I think, like, what's gonna keep their boat floating and not cause them to sink and fall really hard, you know?
Yeah.
I have a question.
Go ahead, Andrew.
And it's I'm sorry, it's a little bit off topic, but since we're hitting the affordable housing, am I correct to assume there's gonna be a surplus of unrentable or unrented houses because of all the construction that we have around town? I heard a scuttlebutt somewhere that we might have a surplus of empty apartments. And I'm talking about in like the 2000 range.
No, because I think reports show that we don't have nearly as much units for the current population. And so, I mean, based off of like that information that I read.
You talking about the report, this report that we got?
I think I'm thinking of I've been following City Council, and there was a presentation that happened in City Council where I think they were talking about, I think it was a developer trying to like make a point for his development. And he was giving some data points. But I haven't heard that, Alejandro, not to say it's not true. I haven't heard that. And I have been trying to follow that conversation quite a bit. But I do believe our current population exceeds the amount of housing units available. And so just based off.
I disagree. It came from a pretty strong source within the city. So I would just want to like revisit that. I think what happened is a lot of these developers paid their square footage, which was incredibly low, and they got away with not providing income-based and low income-based housing, and now they're stuck in the mud because they don't have people to rent to. And it's,
I can't speak to that. I'm sorry, I don't know. And we could ask Molly and her team about it.
Yeah, we could ask for.
Won't they just lower the rent and rent them?
I don't know.
Yeah. In the market.
Yeah.
But it's the gap, it's the cash in lieu that it's been very, there have been some.
Well, we did talk to Molly last meeting, Alejandro, you weren't here, but I did mention like, well, hey, if, you know, the fee in lieu, remember, I was like, well, if we take that away, then we'll get the housing right away for people who need it. And she said, well, that's not necessarily how it works, because sometimes it works for the developer to do the fee in lieu and go with other options, and those can help the market as well. But I think that's a Molly question.
Yeah, we can ask Molly and Alejandro about that. I'm sorry, I can't speak to it.
So.
Do you want to have Martha?
Yeah, Martha, I think when you not sound like a jerk. When you are talking to in your question, is you're talking to duplication. And I will say this board has, because there's been a lot of conversations throughout the years that I've been a part about duplication. So for example, you mentioned medical transportation. So this board funds, this year they fund qualified listeners that provides medical transportation to vets. Longmont. They've actually, if we get a chance, I did my site visit with them, and I can talk to you about them. We also fund Cultivate. Guess what they do?
Transportation.
Medical transportation for vets. At least that's one part. They do much more than that, but that is one part of their things, right? Guess what else we fund? VIA.
Medical transportation to vet.
Well, they're a little more broader.
Seniors.
Yeah, they help a lot more than just vets. But again, those are 3 programs that we funded that provide medical transportation, right? So to Councilmember Christ, could those folks work together?
Where are we today is, that's a difficult question. You can change your priorities, but you can't change their organizational structure.
Exactly, but do we do it?
I think it's something maybe long-term, say that at least you 3 organizations provide these. You concentrate on those 2 and you do those 2, right?
And they do that. Don't get me wrong. I asked them during the site visit, do you work with Cultivate? Yeah, of course, we talk to them all the time. And so they do work together. I'm not saying they don't, but you funded 3 veteran medical transport.
I think VIA stopped transporting vets.
Okay, they might have, I don't know.
Because the other organization is.
So we funded 2 programs that provide medical transportation to vets. Not a bad thing. I'm just letting you know that. So I'm just saying that, Martha, your question is valid. Do we fund duplicate services? And the answer is, yeah, we do.
But there's also the opportunity to set the expectation of this is what it looks like in our mind to leverage the work.
And the other thing is, to be honest, they do it a little bit differently, right? So, for example, qualified listeners, many of their volunteers are vets, and so they don't do. They actually do mental health check-ins with the vet as they're driving, where you might not get that in Cultivate. It's more of a straightforward, I'll take you to the doctor. So I'm not criticizing at all. I'm just pointing out that Martha's question and statement is valid.
Not being a jerk.
Not being a jerk, we have funded duplicate programs, right? So, and talk about duplicate programs, early childhood, we fund TLC.
Right. And
Well, some went
We fund 4 early childhood centers, and there's still waiting lists.
Yeah. It's kind of like the 3 priorities there.
Yeah.
Their educational need, there's no way you're over it.
Where do we go next with this?
Well, I'm gonna do one more point, and then we'll go back to this.
Okay.
And then we can decide tonight how we want to do things.
We need, the night.
If we need the 19th.
Yep.
I like that idea of guiding the organizations to collaborate and not work in silos, and kind of prove that in their application, that's what they're doing.
We can have a pre-grant meeting.
Yeah, we got a pre-grant meeting. We could add a section to the application that Boulder's always okay with us adding. They just don't like us changing, because they have their own committee that looks at it, but they're always okay with us adding stuff. So we could add a question or a section on collaboration if we wanted.
And like making that something that carries weight, you know what I mean? Like if you're in collaboration.
Yeah, and you all can score the applications based on that point. You can go into it with that at the forefront of your minds.
All right, so really great conversation, and I know it's complicated and it's difficult. And the good thing is you all have council to back you, right? Because we're going to take this back to council, and we're going to say, here's kind of what the board is suggesting, and let council do their job to being our policy. At the end, they're the policy setters, right? We're an administrative advisory board that gives them ideas on what to work on. So I talked about how, so I guess the what next question is, we did the voting issue. So I'm just gonna go over here real quick. Hold on. So we did the voting, and we see, paying rent, food, and mental health. These three are kind of the top, right, in most of them, is that right?
All but when you get down to those special.
Right, these special populations are a little bit harder. But even then, you could argue that counseling and mental health support is the same thing. Sheltering, it's not paying rent, but it's unique, and of course, we're gonna support that, right? And then we have childcare here is the only other one, that is added, but mental health care.
Right.
Yeah, so our top three, all right, I'm gonna underline them over here. And then we're gonna talk about how they fit in here and what do we want to do about moving forward? All right, so we know that these are our top three.
And will you just put a note for DFA so you don't forget?
Yeah.
Question mark.
Yeah, I'll look into it. I mean, there might be, again, you have to decide how much of the 1.4 you want to do for DFA.
Sorry, what's the?
Direct management, so literally paying somebody.
Oh, yeah.
If we're not gonna do it, we would say that people, so if the in-between wants to apply for DFA, then we would say now we're allowing it. You know, and I can come back in May and we can say, if I don't find a rule, I'm gonna say it's up to you all. You guys can vote and decide that you're gonna do DFA.
And maybe that's a question too for the nonprofit, right? Like, is DFA a need?
I'm sure it's a need. The question is, do they want to use this funding for DFA or do they rely on this funding to cover their program staff?
Yeah.
You know, what do they want? I mean, we could, if the board says yes, you know, the in-between usually asks like for 70,000. We could do 70,000 DFA, but that means how would they pay their staff?
And the thing too, like the reason I say DFA is just because like I'm not seeing a huge amount of DFA going out into the community from organizations that historically have been able to give that DFA. And so if we say, hey, this chunk is directly for DFA, we're ensuring that that is going out to the community. But of course, we have to have people to distribute that out.
Yeah. Yes,
Yeah, that's adding a level of uncertainty to the organization because, you know, like you hire somebody or you're paying somebody, you know what I mean, with funds that are really not like locked in. So what, they work for you for a year? What about next year?
Guaranteed, yeah.
It's food is next.
Yes.
And then you have two others that are standouts with 6, which are safe emergency shelter for women and for domestic violence. And then you have quality child care is the other standout for.
Quality child care right underneath.
I'm just giving you.
And then what was the other one?
Emergency, I don't know.
You know what's interesting too is like in an ideal world, we would have it be such a competition that, you know, maybe there's only one category because right now there's no like domestic violence shelter that will take dads with kids. Like if that was a thing, like to be eligible for, then that would encourage them to like change some models and actually make that available.
So we got this.
Yeah.
I got 2 in the street right now.
So, okay, so I got that one.
Yeah, those are the 5 that stand
1,
out.
2, 3, 4, 5.
Did you do food and nutrition?
Yes, affordable.
Affordable food.
Yeah, right here, yeah. So then let's just make the connections. And again, you know, this is broad. This is narrow. Yeah, let's do different colors. Let's do different colors. So I did this on purpose. So you remember that when you were kids and you had to like
Match the.
match the things that connect. I always loved that activity.
It was a highlight.
Yes, that's one of my favorite, right? So for example, this goes to here. This goes to here. This goes to here. This traditionally has gone here. And then this as well, we've usually funded it through here. Okay.
So then circle them maybe?
So the only ones that we're not funding or that we haven't put in, even though you could argue, so these 2 have been left out.
Expect the injustice and self-sufficiency.
And guess where Encomitea falls, Alejandro?
Self-sufficiency.
I know, yeah. This is the problem, yeah. This is a huge problem.
Well, but do they, I guess, the question is, do they have to? Are they, like, do they not really match up with anything else?
Yeah.
Even
Amy
though
did-
their services do match up with everything else because they're like the catch-all for a lot of the immigrant community.
Well, so then that begs the question that if we focused on this, could they write an application that
Right.
would fit into food and nutrition, health and well-being, housing stability, and education and skills?
Well, let's think about what they
Yes,
do.
Yes.
Well, again, I would question that.
You what?
Yeah, think about what they do. They do case management,
Legal.
they do legal, and in fact, they want to move more into the legal world.
That's true.
You know, they
So-
do English language learning for adults,
So education.
so education.
GED,
Right.
yeah. Mhm.
And so, you know,
What if they?
Education and skill building, definitely, right?
yeah, and this is where I'm challenging the board, that the human services has been tells us these needs and their needs, and their specific needs of those specific populations, but we've had this before and folks have decided to stay broader because, and again, it goes to your point, Jeffrey, is like, you know, are you willing to give up El Comité? Because they might necessarily fall into one of these. Or are you willing to give up?
Well, because don't we need safety and well, so domestic violence, right? They need legal help.
They do.
So-
But
But the more lines that we draw, we're back
Well,
at.
that's where we were before.
Yeah, well, the thing for safety and justice that I'm concerned about is that point that I brought up last time with folks facing eviction. You
Yeah.
have the, what if
Eviction prevention.
you need,
Boulder County Legal Aid,
not legal aid, it's
Rocky Mountain Legal Center, it's
Bridget
Bridget Justice.
Justice.
We fund all of those.
A majority of the evictions happening in the county.
So could they apply under housing stability?
I hope so.
I don't know.
Because we need them, like, there's nothing else for these families.
Yeah, so
So, yeah, so I mean, what's the motivation to not be broad and just follow those?
so the motivation to not,
Other than,
Just,
here's the motivation now. Now we're gonna get into the meeting that we have with Harold. So a good segue.
We've been living.
You know, we have been talking about this for a long time.
yeah, I mean, I read the thing with the 3 different options but those are different than, I mean, moving to a 2-year cycle kind of changes that significantly.
Yeah.
Right.
A lot of the,
Here's what we talked about with Harold, to your point. So because he explained it, I'm gonna redraw this, right?
You're messing with this
I
drawing.
wanna make,
You're gonna get rubbed.
Yeah.
can you get a black or something?
These are,
I go over here.
is that,
Yeah, it's right, yes. So when we talked about, I'm just going to create, I just haven't had a chance to create. You know, when we do this work, you know, when we started doing this work 20-some years ago, you know, we had a pie of money and we cut it like this. But what's been happening, right, these slides represent the agencies that we fund. Right, this is what's happening, right? This is what we're seeing, is we're seeing this and this
yeah,
and this.
too many agencies.
We're funding too many agencies, right? So
what if we took off education and skill building and put emergency shelter under housing stability?
we have it.
It is.
Oh,
That's the only
it's,
line.
I'm sorry.
Quality childcare is what the
Yeah.
education.
Yeah,
And what if I think you mentioned we could say that under each category, they only get this X percentage.
that was model number 1, and we said, so we don't care. So that was the one that was model number 1, right? That okay, we know that historically, you know, and I think if you guys look at your packet or it's under, it's in one of my charts. That we know that we historically been 28%.
You did what?
Yeah.
True.
We did 28% on education, even though we only allocated 20%. But we just have more applications. What we could do, to your point, is say, okay, the board's gonna say education is historically has gotten 28%. Well, you know what? We are now gonna solidify that. It's no longer a guideline, it's a limit. So what that means for people like Wild Plum is like, hey, we're gonna increase our ask to 120,000. Well, that's fine, but you only have this amount
Of the total.
of total.
We have to limit how many though, because otherwise they'll each get $1, right?
Well, we could make, yeah, we would have to make those type of decisions, right? It's like we say, we have 28% of this funding is going to education, because that's how historically we spend. We're no longer seeing it as a guideline, it's the actual ceiling. All right, we could do that. That was model number one. And what that would do, it would say, and then we could say something like, we will no longer accept any new education applications, right? Because new organizations, new programs, this is what we're funding. We could do that. Or if we say we're gonna continue to accept it, but you only get 28%, that means that this pie, this 28% pie starts.
Well, it does or it doesn't. I mean, if there's discipline among the group, you gotta know that at some point you're hitting diminishing return. So, I mean, that I don't know if that's a number, an absolute number, but if you know, for example, that it's 200 grand and you don't believe that anyone can do any good less than 20 grand, then you know you're not funding more than like.
Well, and that's the thing.
I'm making that up. I'm just saying.
Yeah,
We
gotta have a.
like Boulder has parameters. You can't apply for less than 10,000 K. Boulder has that rule. So we let Alejandro has a.
What if we limited each category to 2 or 3 agencies only and did ranked choice?
Yeah.
You could do that.
But I'm just worried, I mean, I'm going along, but if you cut out the people that we've normally funded, are they gonna be in trouble? I mean, that was Christine.
That was council members Yarborough's concern. That's when she pushed back on me on the 3-year model.
Yeah.
Because that was exactly her concern.
Well, that is why we do tell them to diversify their funding sources.
And we talked about that, right?
Because these could happen.
Right, it is.
You know?
Is the intention then that the same categories would be, that folks could only apply every other year and the same categories would be every?
So the way it would work, so that everyone, let me walk you through it, and it's in more detail in the memo I sent you.
Right, yeah.
So let's say we would choose the category, so based on this.
But this has the 3 year, so I'm.
No, this has a 2-year. I have a 3 and a 2.
Oh, you're just doing what happens in the 3rd year?
Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So based on this, right, based on this work right here, we have, if we do DFA, let's just say we say yes to DFA, and then we put that under housing stability, that's fine. We do DFA, and let's say we do either food or mental, the board decides. Food, all right, so this year, so year 1, I would do the math and say, and I think food and DFA, okay. Housing stability. Those are the agencies that are gonna apply for 2 years. So I'm gonna pretend that I'm an agency, right? So I am gonna apply I'm the art center, and I'm gonna ask for $100,000 in direct financial assistance.
Done.
Okay. Now, when we get to the binary question 2, right, that's another question. There's a lot of stuff to talk about. I'm so sorry. But this is what you joined the board for, to make those hard decisions. You ask for it. So let's say we say 100 grand. Okay, so I'm gonna say you have 2 years of funding. So we're gonna double that, or like to Christina's point, you ask for 100 for the first year, 120 for the next year, right? And for right now, we are going binary. We're not doing, the standard deviation and rate. We're just going binary, right? So we say yes to the art center. So now they have 220,000 that they have to split, right? They can choose to split. So the contract is going to go from 2026 through 2027. So they can't apply if they get it now.
2028.
they can't apply until funding for 2028. So they're not gonna apply again in 2027, they're out of cycle. And, okay, so that means there's gonna be less available for the rest, right? So there'll still be some. So it's not like they're completely cut out. And I did the math, you can see the math in my memo. There'll still be some, there'll be less. So for example, education might get, quite a bit less, right? So depending on how much is available, how many apply. They'll still get some money, but they're not gonna get until it's their turn. So in year 2, we could say, okay, it's gonna be education and I'm just gonna throw something at safety and justice, right? Now, where it gets a little bit complicated is that every priority area historically has different, this is where the 28% comes from, right? And so what I would base it on, what I base the 2-year piece would be on the 20, for education, it'd be 28%, right? So they would get, I'd have to figure out mathematically what 28% looks like. It might be as easy as just doubling it at 56% of funding for that year, and then they have they're gonna have those 2 years to use it, right? It could just be simple as just doubling it. And so then the 44% is for the other agencies or whatever's left after we fund 2 priority areas. And see how that works? And then they would be eligible again, even though they might not be the top choice that year, they'd be eligible for in year 3.
So we give the top most of the money, but there's still some room, some
Right.
money for the.
Yeah. And mental health, you missed mental health.
All right, or it could be,
It could be mental health.
it could be education and mental health. Yeah. Now, the question I would ask for you all is, are we saying yes only to mental health, or are we allowing other health agencies to apply as well? Or do we put them in a separate category? Right, because we have agencies that we fund that are not, even though we have a lot that are mental health, but we have some that are not. What would we do? You have to decide what you want to do with those agencies.
So can you give us an example of a health agency?
Dental aid,
St. Benedict's. right?
St. Benedict's.
Dental aid. You can get false teeth.
No,
it's tough.
it is tough, and you're only making the hard decisions. And then
And then continue on, so 3.
So then year 3, we can do the next one. We can say, so year 3, we do the 2 that were the last, right? So we do self-sufficiency and safety and justice. We want to keep them, right? So we do self-sufficiency, and all of a sudden, what we've gone through all of our 6 priorities that we've had for years.
Yeah.
But that doesn't really address the needs assessment. That's kind of my issue is like, yes, the cycling works, but it doesn't address the fact that you're not really reprioritizing.
And mental health.
What I'm saying is you have to ensure that the money follows the needs assessment. It's not just because by year 3, those priorities should still in some way be funded, but they don't become number 1 because they're. It doesn't make sense.
Those were never.
They're not. Right. So 1, 2, and 3, but high priorities have to each be 1 some year.
Is
But-
it possible?
Priorities, and the ones that are the highest will have been funded and secured and safeguarded essentially.
What you're arguing is that these guys never be.
Well, no, I'm not arguing that. That's why I think that within this, there's a
There's
percentage
a
that goes to some.
300,000.
Yeah, it goes to
With the comment, and that's the combination.
20%, right? 80% is handled this way, but 20% is handled. Yeah.
You got Kim wanting to jump into.
Yeah, I was actually thinking the same thing. And and maybe this has already been mentioned, I'm having a hard time keeping up remotely, but is there a possibility to keep those funding, those needs assessments identified in percentages and keep those percentages constant every year, even with a 2-year cycle? So the money is being allocated based off of priorities of the needs assessment, but the cycle's just extended for that funding.
Well, no, I actually have a really hard time with that, because anytime you do more than 1 year, it messes up the other percentages.
How, oh, yes, you're right. Okay, got it. But
You
if you
have-
keep, no, but if you're keeping it constant, how does it mess up the percentages? If you keep the percentages constant every year and you're
So-
issuing funds every year, then those funds should remain the same percentage.
So let's say we do housing stability and, what was the other one, food, right?
And mental health.
All right,
Those are the top.
so, they're gonna take, if we're gonna give them in order to give them 2 years, you basically have to double the amount that they have available from what they typically have, right? Unless you want to arbitrarily say,
But-
so the way you're doing
But
it, Katie, you're not considering historical funding, you're saying we're gonna do 80% this way and 20% this way, which is fine. It doesn't take into account what we have funded in the past.
Correct, and, yeah, and so correct, and I mean, I think the other thing that I would just caution is like, I'm gonna go back to my, prior lives. It is changing too many variables about how you operate makes it very difficult to isolate difficulty.
Right.
So, I mean, so part of my other caution would be if, let's just say, a pretty major paradigm shift is there's going to be much more arithmetic discipline about how money is allocated based on the priorities of the people who we're serving. That's just a blanket statement. I'm making that up. It's not gonna, I'm not wordsmithing it in this case. So that is a major paradigm shift based on what has been happening. Therefore, I would say there shouldn't be another major paradigm shift at the same time, which would be the cycle frequency.
I like that.
And I get it that, it's attractive to consider another option, but I would question the wisdom of making two major paradigm shifts at the same time. Because when something goes wrong, particularly in a climate that is as volatile as this one, an extended horizon locks you into potential trouble for a longer period of time if you predict wrong. So to me, like, these are times for, pretty laser sharp focus and discipline. And I would say they also, if you just look at the ether, are not times where extending a time horizon is necessarily a great idea, because volatility is.
And I think that's what
everywhere.
Councilmember Yarbrough was.
And you might not know what,
So just to clarify, so I understand what you're saying. Well, not only leave as is, but we could remove one of these variables, right? Say, we're gonna forget the cycle piece. And we're gonna, at least temporarily, in 2026, we're gonna forget the cycle piece, and we're gonna focus on how we work these into our process.
right.
Is that what you're saying?
I am, because I think, I think that because then when something works or not. When you change two big things at one time, it's hard to know what caused it.
The scientific method, part of it.
Because I would even say that phase it in, but I think that's better, just to do one big change.
And
then,
these are not, like, I would say by and large, what you see in the ether is people are making shorter timeline decisions because of volatility.
Yeah.
So it seems like that would be important.
Okay.
I mean, I know that when this conversation started, what is happening out in the world wasn't happening in the world. So it was much more predictable environment.
Very, very well
And
said.
I've been meaning to say this, because the one thing that and again, great human services needs it, but we don't, to Alejandro's point earlier, we don't see immigrants as a special population. And I don't think they did that level of work on immigrants. And so we're missing their voice too in this.
Yeah.
And I don't see.
Hard to get their voice at this time too, because it's.
Yeah, it is hard. I think that folk are not engaging because they're scared, and it makes a lot of sense. But, okay, so
We have 10 minutes.
10 minutes.
And so my thinking is that we do want to continue this conversation for the night.
Yeah.
I think we're gonna need a 19.
Is there, can we make some decision tonight? Is there anything
So I think
we can?
So, okay, I think we can decide. I think we can decide. So Katie is making a suggestion that we leave this behind for now, the cycle piece. And we focus on how do we incorporate the new priorities or the new needs into our current system.
And then become more prescriptive.
And we become more prescriptive. We look at DFA, we look at other things. So that's what Katie's suggestion.
Can I ask a clarifying question?
Yeah.
If an applicant wants to apply for 2 years of funding, is your recommendation that they couldn't do that, and they can only apply for 1 year of funding?
That's my recommendation, because I don't think, even as an applicant, right? I mean, honestly, like my most recent life was in public education. That ship does not turn fast.
Yeah.
It's spinning right now.
Yeah.
So like, I don't think even the wisest not-for-profit with the most experience is still dealing in uncharted waters. So one could argue that we're simply saying these are not the times to extend a horizon, because we know everyone needs to be agile. So
And that's been in the last thing.
and it has. So I would just, that would be my like, that's just, again, it's hard to do that. That would just be my like overarching like self-discipline.
I have to disagree. Because I feel like in uncharted times, like organizations need to know what they have, so they know how to plan. And I think the voice from the nonprofits was more steady funding so that they can plan for the future. And like some of the conversations that we have in our nonprofit is like, hey, guys, like I've heard from our nonprofit, like our funding's stable, our funding's set for the year. We're not anticipating a big impact, like because they can see what's coming in, what's guaranteed. They're looking at what's been lost and they're able to project, right? But if agencies are not able to project, which the huge, like what they were really expressing was, hey, we need that stability. Like it's hard for us to build programs and help the community if we don't know that if the funding is going to drop severely next year. And so it's a catch-22. I'm not.
Yeah, I think both. So here's the other way we could do it. We could say, okay, to your point, to have a scientific method, the only problem is you're right, that this is a longer term commitment than this, right? But we could say, you know what, we are not gonna touch these this year. We're gonna study this, because again, this is just draft. We're gonna study this year and we won't implement it until 2027 and we can start this. But Crystal, the thing with Katie's point here is valid, that once you get into this cycle, you're in the cycle.
Yeah. So you can't back out.
You can't back out. And are we ready to, given the volatility that we're seeing, are we ready to jump into this cycle right now? Because it's not a 1 year thing. It's a 6 year, it's a 6 year commitment to go through the entire cycle, or at least a 3 year commitment to go through the entire cycle.
I mean, so you said 80-20 sort of, right? I mean, one way, if we did it more like 60-40, but we want to do this, but we don't want it to be as severe. We can play with those numbers, but.
Well, the other thing is, let me ask a question for my own edification. I don't recall the percentage that was the food question, accessing healthy. How much currently do we allocate towards that category, would you say?
It's in
I
your
know.
packet. Let me see.
Oh, I didn't come up with
Second. It's in this gigantic packet of stuff.
that. The reason I say that is like, it's part of the question would be how aligned are we to these things? Because if we're not very aligned to them,
Yeah.
like, I think we
Talking
could
about
all.
the pie graph,
Yeah.
where we have the
I-
percentages based on.
Yeah.
current- Yeah, it's 123,
Aligned. I mean, they were aligned.
123, bro.
Page 140.
Right here. These are the. There you go. So,
Oh my God.
Children. So for example, yeah, as an example, that one, what percentage did we say we were gonna fund, and then what percentage?
yes, I can tell you that. I have it. So we said we were gonna fund, let's do food.
Yeah, I'm just curious.
We said we were gonna fund food at 13%. And we funded them historically at 14%.
Okay.
So we're just sticking pretty close.
Yeah, so, but now we know that we're having a food crisis. And we know all these people think we're having a food crisis. So, you know, to me, the bigger impact's gonna be get that right, like get food right. So now food needs to be whatever, I'm making it up, like a
20%.
third or whatever, you know, whatever, like a third of 80%, right, at least, right? So I'm just saying, like, to be strategic about that, to say like, you have some course correcting to do on what is needed versus the categories of funding, even just against the benchmark of what we said we were gonna fund, right? So like, I don't know, to me, I'd clean that up before I'd go work messing with the timing. Like, it just seems like we're out of alignment with need, self-reported need, admittedly, at some level. I'm not judging, I'm just saying like, that's where we are, like.
I think that we have to look at, because for food, are there other organizations that provide food?
I'm just saying, who's hitting the fan on food? People have to, like,
Yeah,
you know,
no, but I'm just
fan
saying,
that.
but I meant to, I don't know, I think there are some specific services that we don't do, or we don't want to get rid of.
So the beauty of Model 1, I know 857, thank you all so much for your patience and your work. This is really hard. This is really, really hard, and I appreciate you all. The beauty of the Model 1 was all of a sudden we are being more prescriptive. So to your point,
Yeah.
if we said, hey, our needs assessment is saying that food is a bigger need, so we're going to increase the funding for food from 13% of 1.4 million to 25% of 1.5 million, right? It's a 12% increase. And the difference between this, doing it with this model than we have ever done before, is in the past, we said 13%, and it doesn't matter. The agencies would apply for whatever they would apply for, but now we would say,
It matters.
it matters. We're saying 25%, so Longmont Meals on Wheels, increase your ass. Community food share, increase your ass. But then we gotta tell them, then we gotta tell the other folks, hey, folks, you need to decrease your ass because our need assessment said that this is where we need to be putting our money. And we need to be okay with that. This board historically has not been okay with telling agency how much to apply for. We have to be okay with that.
Yeah.
You know, I don't think, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was gonna say that I agree with the fine tuning allocations first before we introduce any type of cycle. Because like Eliberto pointed out, the cycle is gonna be like 6 year out or something, right? 3 years minimum. But we're in such a fragile moment right now. And so sporadic, like one day we're tariffing this much, this day we're not, this day we're doing this day we're not. So we're in such a very volatile, exactly, moment right now. We can't make decisions for six years out right now. Right now, we need to make a decision for next year. That's it, and just concentrate, like us addicts say, one day at a time, 1 year at a time.
Would that provide more stability in funding?
Well, it will provide stability right now. Yeah, we will know what's going on because we don't know what's going on tomorrow. We don't
Like
know, literally.
So what it would do,
From year to year.
what
Yeah.
it would do, it would make, because we're capping amounts, it would make things more certain for the nonprofits. It may not provide stability because then the other conversation is how are we going to a binary type of situation where it's not about percentage of how much you get, it's more like you get what you apply for, which may be difficult. But it would at least tell them you have this much to apply for.
It's much more transparent.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, if you say you're gonna do one thing and then you do something else, that's not super
Well,
transparent.
again, it's not that, you know, when we tell, the way that we used the limits before was it was just a set individual limit, so nobody could get more than 50% of what that limit was. That's how we used it. But we never said this is what we had. If we said 25% to housing, I think it wouldn't create stability in the sense that it would give them, because I know agencies want that multi-year funding. It wouldn't do that, but it would at least tell them, I know how much I have to go for. I know how much is in that pot.
How much to expect? Because that first year, remember when we introduced the way that we score things now, that is more on an analog scale. It's not digital. It's not by, it's not yes or no or this much or this much. We're like, you can get down to the cents. A lot of those historical organizations were very disappointed because it was like incredibly different from what they used to get. But now if we tell them, hey, this is the pile, this is what is available, and look how many people are applying, they can prepare and be like, okay, well, I'm not getting as much as I'm used to getting. I could prepare. I can look and seek elsewhere for more money and
And I know
resources.
Yeah, Jeff, go ahead. We can go a little bit over.
Yeah, I'm trying to think what I was going to say. I think I was just going to say probably something I've already said before, which is I think it may be valuable for us to utilize the information that we gathered tonight. I think this is helpful. I think this is pretty directive. And I think applying that information to our application process would make a whole lot of sense.
This is where we applied.
Yeah.
We would put it up front. The only challenge is, and this is a product of how our budgeting team worked, is I don't know how much money I have, or we don't know how much money we have until July.
Mhm.
And our application goes out in June. And so that makes it very difficult. But we could tell them the percentages and say, this is not what we have, but if we were to have 1.5 million or 1.4, this is how we would break down.
Yeah.
We just can't tell them exactly because it really depends on the budget. I mean, this is the hard part of being a percentage of the budget and not a line item.
But does this solve the problem at the end of the day with all these organizations applying and the funds being spread out? No, we have.
That's
Yeah.
I'd like to circle back on Alejandro's comment an hour ago about that ranked choice next time, because I think that's what I found myself doing last year, was trying to compare one application to another.
That's a good idea.
And I think if we say 35% of the funding is dedicated to food or whatever, and we begin to rank all those food-related applications, then we can say, well, the top 3 consume the 35%. That's the biggest impact.
We could change that.
Yeah, we're comparing apples to apples that way, and I think that's where we can find the best projects available.
Okay, yeah, we could do that. I mean, we could talk about that. And the good thing is we have time to do that. We have time with this, because that's the operational side of the thing. Because that's, if you all want to change how we do our grading or scoring, or how once we do the scoring, I will tell you, it might make for a longer deliberation meeting, or it might need another special meeting to work through that. So be prepared for that, but we can totally do that.
Right.
So I'm fine going that route.
Yeah.
But it's 9:04, and what I want to know tonight, because I think we've had a lot of conversation, because we got to take this back to council.
Right.
Right. And so what I want to know tonight, it feels like that we because of the volatility, what Katie says, we're going to leave, not that we're going to leave it forever, but for 2026, we're going to leave it aside. We're going to focus on aligning these with that. And I need this from you guys, you all, you're going to be okay with, for the first time ever, making these not just guidelines, but actual limits. Does that make sense?
Yeah, like capping each one of them.
Why are you ready to do that? Why do you say that so hesitantly? Like what?
Because the board has never wanted to do that before.
What's the negative side to it? Like, is there something that?
So the reason that the board has never wanted to is because they always felt that it wasn't the board's place to tell nonprofits what they needed. Yeah.
So
But the-
basically, they had the pile out, and everybody had access to this pile,
Yeah.
and they didn't wanna conform them into little boxes or section them out. You know what I mean? But the times is different.
Yeah, this is a completely different board that was told me that. I guess I just had the historical trauma.
Like, we just realized we have to refine our methodology now, because we have so many
Organizations, we have to meet the need.
forward.
So is the board okay with that? Do we need to vote for that? Or is that just guidance from the board?
Or do I do a special meeting?
Well, we have a 19. If we can do now, if we can start, and hopefully it'll only be an hour. If you all can think about it.
And maybe it's a vote, and we still need to talk through these different pieces with council that we caroled about, so.
We can, maybe in a few years we can do.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's just, I don't think anyone right now is like going out there and extending time. And that's changed so rapidly, like, no one has to feel bad about saying like, hey, we're course correcting because it's gotten incredibly volatile, right? It's just real, like, that's reality.
At 10 o'clock news, the whole world will change.
Right, who knows, right? We've been online.
I think I go home. So so I just want to make sure that the board feels comfortable with it. Can I just have a straw poll, not necessarily a real vote, but just raise of hands, are you okay with setting limits? Okay, all right. You're struggling with it still a little bit?
So the 18th, we're gonna come back and just kind of solidify what we're.
I think what we'll do on the 19th
Or the 19th.
is we have. And again, I think it'll only take hopefully just an hour, but what I'd like to do, we need to go back to council. What I'd like to do is the board say, here are the percentages we want for this year. So just figure that out together.
Well, for your point though about, I know, I'll keep it to you all night, emergency funding, could we do it like 95% and then have like a 5%?
You could, we could talk about that on 19th if you want to keep 5% for Christina to address emerging needs.
Yeah.
We could have that conversation. And then again, it would be just
That's legit.
just getting this aligned. That's the big thing.
I think I'm okay with it.
Okay.
Your hesitancy.
Well, we give time to think about it. Yeah. Think about questions, think about.
Yeah. Okay. So thank you all so much. This is a long, hard conversation. I'm hoping that we keep the 19th brief. We will have, for those that can't be here, we'll have snacks and coffee.
So we get.
9:30 or 11:30. You're out of the country. But yeah.
Okay, we'll move the site visit report to next meeting.
Yes, yeah.
To the next meeting, that's on.
Okay.
So,
Other business, so can we move?
yeah.
Martha? Hi. She's the, what is the title? I'm the chair.
She's the vice chair.
There you go. I was like, I couldn't, I might need you to step in because I might have to go to surgery. So just as a FYI, just to be prepared if you need to chair the meeting, Martha. But that's the only business that I have. And I think
I would move it, but we have to go back to council.
When do you go back to council? Just out of curiosity.
Is it May 22nd, you said?
no, it's okay. No, I can do the April meeting and everything.
Yeah.
But the May board,
Oh, okay.
the future board meetings, I would need Martha probably to fill in, just depending on, I'm just giving her a heads up that she might have to, and if not, then someone else can chair the meeting.
Yeah.
Okay, all right, do I have a motion to adjourn? Okay, we have a motion, do I have a second? Okay, I have 2 seconds. All in favor?
All right, again, thank you all. Have a good night.
Do you open the?
Good night.